Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Paganism in Practice. I'm very excited to introduce my friend and fellow DRE, Kim Chambers, who is here to talk to us about paganism. So let me spotlight you, Kim. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Well, glad to see what other congregations are doing and adapting to reach and explore different options. Paganism practice is a pretty broad topic. I'd like to start off just defining what paganism is. A lot of social media, a lot of movies, and so on and so forth. Usually talk about how paganism is witchcraft and being able to control people, putting love spells on people and stuff like that, and that's not really accurate. There's a little basis to it, but we don't mix stuff around in a cauldron and all of a sudden we have control of our universe. It's a little more subdued, a little more complex than that. It's basically acknowledging where we are in the earth and in the universe, and making use of celebrating and making use of our own abilities and using the earth to see where we're at and what we can do. One of the things that really called to me with paganism is the flexibility. I know a lot, when you first start doing research into paganism, there's a lot of basis in Wicca, which is part of paganism, but that's just one facet. It's, again, very, very flexible. You don't need to buy a whole bunch of materials. You don't need a dedicated space. There are pagan soldiers who have like some little AV box with like a birthday candle, a means to light that candle, and a couple of crystals, and that's what they carry with them for their ritual. And you don't even need that much. You adapt and use with what you have. When it comes to your abilities, you use what you can afford, what you can do, with what space you have, whatever's going to keep you safe. You aren't defined by one thing or another in regards to dogma or belief system. There are plenty of atheist pagans. There are some pagans who intertwine Christianity, Judaism, other faiths into paganism. Myself, I'm pagan and I'm UU. My husband is atheist, pagan, and UU. And it goes on and on. It also depends on your comfort zone, as far as whether or not you want to practice on your own, practice within your family, which is what I do, or practice within a group. And there's really no defined rules, particularly because we don't have a one organization that has a bunch of guidelines. No one's going to tear up your witch card or your pagan card, because you didn't celebrate, this holiday this particular way, or you're not part of a coven, or whatnot. It's more about fulfilling yourself and just making do with what calls to you. It can be a great source of healing. Depending on what you do, and also not just healing, but like challenging yourself. One of the things that a lot of pagans do, particularly if they gravitate toward having a deity and try to find out what deity has called you, and you go through that experience, sometimes you're challenged quite a bit. Me, myself being openly polyamorous and going through that exploration, I was kind of first myself taken back when Juno had called me. For those who may not know, Juno is the goddess of marriage in Greek and Roman mythology, and she's always going after Zeus for him not abiding by their monogamous contract. So that just really took me back. Like, why am I being called by this deity? And I was able to do a lot of exploration and was able to challenge myself to make sense of that and to see where that fit in with all of me. Other times, the challenge of being called by Loki, the Norse god of chaos, really. It can be a challenge to, when he loves you a little too much in the wrong ways.
Please welcome Ryan Stevenson. I spent a lot of time in jails and prisons. I spent a lot of time with people who live in the margins of our society.
Hey, y'all. I'm so sorry. Make sure that your microphone is muted. Thank you.
But on the same time, like, while you can get a lot from the spiritual practice, there's also a sense of responsibility that you have to have. The flow of energy is a very, very important part of paganism. What you give out is what you should be taking. Not just in the concept of karma that a lot of other faiths follow, but just, if you take a lot of good things, you should give back a lot of good things. Maybe not so much giving back bad things, but making sure that you are doing stuff to improve the planet, whether it's participating in environmental justice and social justice and economic justice. It's improving the world around you. I really feel that a vital part of paganism, at least for me, is that aspect. While not everyone buys into that, but again, that's back to the flexibility. We can, with there not being one dominant belief system, we can read, big names in paganism and think, this is not for me, this is garbage, this is nonsense, and just has to decide and move on with what does work, what does serve you. And paganism isn't perfect, because we do have struggles with different things as a community, but that's every group of people. There's going to be differences and there's going to be conflict. But it's the responsibility to make sure that we are serving, that we were blessed with every privilege that we have, every resource that we have, and it's important to kind of give back. And again, with that flexibility, it's also a responsibility for you to be flexible. If you have this great big ritual planned and everything has to go off, and then something else just comes in and messes with your schedule. It's, that it can be a challenge to get over that, to be able to find that spiritual fulfillment in that ritual, even though it didn't all go to plan. Sometimes, it gets too windy and the candles that you lit just won't stay lit. Or sometimes, you can't even get the candle lit in the first place. You strike a match and the match breaks, and that happens 2 or 3 times. Sometimes it's, just forces of nature that come in. Like, there have been times when we have set stuff aside and there's a stray cat that comes in and starts nibbling on something that we put out in the circle. And it's okay to have that good laugh and just to work around it. You still get you still see to your goal. One of the questions I do get quite a bit these days about paganism is about cultural appropriation. Just being able to find exactly where your ancestors came from is a privilege. And even if you are able to have that privilege, not every worshiper is going to connect with the pantheon, the spiritual practices of their direct ancestors. They're going to feel called by something else. And that is, that is a fine line to address, and something that we are responsible for. Making sure that we are understanding the practice itself, making sure we are respecting the boundaries of the culture that it comes from. For instance, a lot of people will still claim a spirit animal, even though Indigenous Americans have asked us to not use, if you're not, Native American, don't claim to have a spirit animal, find something else to find some other terminology to connect with, to connect with, that animal. Other times, just if you're wanting to study the Yoruba practices in Africa, stop and think, why am I doing this? Why is this, why do I think this is spiritually fulfilling? Can I adapt it into a different way that doesn't take from them? What calls to me? What part of that calls to me, and how can I adapt it without just swiping it? What else can I do to advocate for their needs? But overall, that's kind of my take on practices in general about paganism.
Thank you,
Thank
Kim.
you all for listening.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and remove your spotlight, and then anyone who has questions, they can, you can unmute yourself, and we'll just do this popcorn style, and we have about 15 minutes for questions. Go ahead, Jane.
I have a question. I guess I'm pondering why it's problematic if you use some beliefs from other religions, because it seems like most religions do use bits and pieces from others. So say, for instance, having a spirit animal, how that could take away from somebody else's religion.
Do you want to answer that, Kim?
Yeah. Well, that is kind of, it's not just their spiritual practice, it's also just part of their cultural practice. And given that there are many, many other alternatives that someone who's not Native American can use to still get the same point, there's really not a need to step across that boundary.
Can you raise your hand?
Go ahead, Lois.
You were talking about God's calling to you. How does that happen? How did you know a certain God was calling to you?
Well, it happens many different ways. Sometimes it's just it comes to you in a dream. There is something unusual that happens out in your life that just doesn't normally happen, and it's a symbolism from that deity. Other times, some people use divination to find that. Meditation is a great way to find that as well.
Okay.
I'm trying to get some clarity between, and maybe it's not critical that I understand that, the clarity in definitions, and understanding what pagan is versus maybe another earth-based religious practice that might go by another name. Or does it really matter, those distinctions? Would it be would another earth-based religion that goes by a particular name from its tradition, would it be considered pagan?
I would think so. Like, pagan's a very broad term. It's kind of like, Christianity that has all the different denominations. Paganism is a very broad term.
I have a question about some of the practices in other religions that have been appropriated from paganism. Can you give us 2 or 3 of those and tell us what the origins were?
Well, a lot of what we use is from what people use in ancient times. Maybe not. I know like I said, there's one friend that I know. She's white and she practices Yoruba, the Yoruba faith. She does a lot of divination based on their practices, but she in turn, she does a lot of advocating and the like for Black people and for people in Africa, to keep their culture alive. And she's done a lot of learning and listening from them directly. I'm trying to think of some others. The use of white sage being burned is very common to use to purify and set a sacred space. There are a lot of other alternatives that can be used. Blessed moon water, different different bundles that can be used instead, and stuff like that. I think off the top of my head, what else?
Doug, are you also asking, like, say, modern Judeo-Christian practices, such as Easter or Christmas? Are you asking what?
I kind of had the assumption that Christmas, the Christian time Christmas, was kind of appropriated from pagan practice.
Yes.
There was a celebration around, I don't know if it was the 25th of December but they kind of took it from paganism. Is that what
Yes.
your understanding is?
Yes, that there's actually a lot of the holidays are taken from that. Like Yule or Saturnalia, that's usually celebrated around late December, was transformed to Christmas. Ostara, which is actually Monday, was then moved into Easter. A lot of the terminology, the symbolism was taken from that. The concept of our dead earth, our sleeping earth coming back and sprouting from the ground. Very, very similar to the idea of Jesus, being
Resurrection.
being put in the ground and then coming back to life. In early August, we have a celebration called Lammas or Lunasa. Back in early Christian times, there was usually a day where it was your first loaf of bread, and you went and you had your first loaf of bread that you made, being blessed. Halloween or Samhain becoming All Saints Day. Trying to think of some of the others. I don't remember how the other ones might have been taken, but a lot of those have been fallen out of practice by modern day Christianity.
Mhm.
But, yeah.
Is it based on a lunar calendar?
Some of it's based on lunar calendar. Some of us celebrate based have smaller celebrations based on the turning of the rotation of the moon and her cycles. But it's also like the big holidays, the Sabbats, like I was mentioning, those are based upon the sun. They mark a lot of them way back when they were used for farmers to kind of mark, okay, we're going to celebrate, but now we're going to work on this next part of the harvest.
I'd like to
Are there
ask, what is
any-
divination? What is
Divination?
divination? And also, when were you first called to paganism, and where do you practice?
Well, divination is a way to interpret questions that you have about the world in general. Most of the time you have a very specific question. There's ways to use runes, which are Nordic engravings on usually rocks that you would pull out, and the different symbols mean different things. Tarot cards, tea leaves, palm reading. Technically, astrology is part of that. Numerology, the study of numbers and how they all interact with each other, based like on your birth date and your name and the like. There's a whole slew of ways to use divination. But that's pretty much it. If you're feeling just silly and really all that you have is it, you can really use, if worst comes to worst, you could use a magic 8-ball. If that's really all you had on you. But I started being called to it around my college years. I was raised Catholic. I was one of the first female altar servers in the church. I kind of left after a slew of different signs that it was just not for me, including almost burning the church down. Yeah, on accident, I swear. But after having a few years of not having a spirituality to connect to, I just started doing a search, and I went to the Belief Net, and Paganism was one of the top ones, along with UU. And I just began practicing by myself. I have reached out and worked in different groups, different covens over the years. But these days, it just has seemed easier and it seems more fitting to practice just within my family. My husband and my 2 daughters. And occasionally the cats when they want to join in.
Do you have any books or writers you might recommend on paganism?
My favorite really is Ellen Dugan. She is very practical when it comes to learning about paganism. There's one book, I'm drawing a blank to the name, but I remember how she was talking about, all of the symbolism for Yule, the evergreen tree and snow and all of that, and talking about how it can be challenging when you're sitting in Arizona where there's cacti and sand and not a single bit of snow. She is very clear to read. She is very open to the idea of, not everything's going to be for everybody in her books, and challenges people to think about what she says, not just say, well, Ellen said it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Does the UUA provide resources for pagans?
Pardon? I'm sorry.
Does the UUA provide very many resources for pagan UUs?
Well, there is an organization called CUPS that does help with connecting other UU pagans within each other. And there's a lot of the UU practices in general, just they just, for at least for me, mesh really well together with paganism. If you think a lot of the UU principles, you can blend that very nicely with pagan practices, and it can be more of a focus in a way.
In the beginning, when you were talking about what symbols or material things that a pagan might have, you used a phrase about to keep safe. Could you expound on that? Are there certain rituals for safety or?
Well, other than like, making sure that you don't set yourself on fire, or, stuff like that, like, but also to, even though I'm trying to think, I don't want to say it's not scaring anybody, but there are times when, even though in the US we have the privilege of freedom of religion, sometimes it's not as easily given to pagans. I will tell you, there is a nonprofit that I was employed by for a little bit that was given awards for their ethics and how they treat their employees. When I came out, my boss and her boss, and I really couldn't go any higher than her boss. They kind of set out because they were upset that I wouldn't work an extra day. That was one of my holidays. They then just found every single little thing to nitpick at me and to make the workplace a toxic environment. I know there is a case with Panera Bread. I think it's in Connecticut. There's a lawsuit going on where two employees who were married essentially lost their job. Like, they eventually got their hours cut, and to the point where they lost their jobs because their manager didn't like that they didn't practice her faith and instead were pagan. And sometimes, for some people, it's also an issue of housing. If you think of, teens, or young adults who may be practicing this while living at home with parents, if their parents find out, they may lose their home. That sort of thing. That's more of what I was thinking of in safety.
Are there any elected famous people or anything who are pagans?
Not anyone who's incredibly famous. I don't know of any elected officials. But
I remember we had a sermon a number of years ago at our church by an atheist, and he talked about how people would have to keep it hidden if they wanted to be elected, that there was discrimination. So so I gather there's similar discrimination against
there is.
pagans. Okay.
So I will say I did run for office last year, and even though I was open about my spirituality, that was not the issue at all. But particularly for school boards, which is what I ran for, last year was really an off year for that sort of campaign. So take that as it is.
Any last questions? No? Well, Kim, I wanted to thank you so much for agreeing to give this talk and for answering our numerous questions. I know a lot of people at First Church were curious about paganism, and I'm glad that we were able to partner on this. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.
You all have a wonderful night.
Bye.
Bye.